All right, we're about to jump into a story about ancient faith, political power, and a bit of historical detective work. And it all spins around one single, powerful, and as it turns out, really misunderstood idea. This is the story of a dangerous word. Our whole investigation kicks off right here, with this one word from the ancient Ethiopian language of Ge'ez, masalam. It comes from a Syriac word, and on the surface its meaning seems totally straightforward. One who prays. Kind of beautiful, right? A simple, pure description for a person of faith. But what if it was hiding something else entirely? I mean, what if that word, that simple description of someone praying, was actually an accusation? A label so toxic it could get you branded a heretic and thrown out of the church. That's the mystery we're unpacking today. To really get why this word became so loaded, we've got to rewind way back to the 4th century. Over in Mesopotamia and Syria, there was this new spiritual movement popping up, and they were known by the Greek version of our word, Messalians. It literally means the praying people. Sounds harmless enough, doesn't it? Well, according to the official histories, the Messalians had this very specific and pretty radical belief. They taught that every single one of us is born with a demon living inside. And the only way to drive that demon out was through constant, nonstop prayer. And you can probably see where this is going. This idea created a massive conflict. For the Messalians, it was all about your own personal journey, just you and your prayers. But for the established great church, salvation came through the official rituals, the sacraments, like baptism and the Eucharist. And those were always handled by priests. So yeah, you can imagine the church leadership saw a huge problem. If personal prayer is the only thing that really matters, then what's the point of baptism? Why do you need priests or bishops? By making salvation so individual, the Messalians were basically making the church's whole structure seem kind of irrelevant. And for that, they were condemned as heretics. Okay, so that's the official story of this heresy from Syria. But you might be wondering, what on earth does this have to do with Ethiopia? Well, the connection is way more direct than you'd think, and it ended up shaping Christianity in the Horn of Africa in a huge way. So the historical bridge here is a group of missionaries known as the Nine Saints. Sometime around the 5th or 6th century, they came over from the Syriac-speaking world and pretty much founded monasticism in Ethiopia. They brought with them these super intense spiritual traditions of the Desert Fathers, a lifestyle of extreme self-discipline and prayer called asceticism. This created a really powerful cultural link right across the Red Sea. And the impact was just enormous. This Syrian influence cemented this deep tradition of monasticism and intense ascetic devotion right into the DNA of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. And it's a tradition that's still a huge part of its identity today. Okay, and this is where our story takes a really fascinating turn. For centuries, that was the story everyone accepted. But modern scholars started going back to the evidence, and they began asking a really radical question. What if the Messalians never actually existed? At least, not in the way we've been told. So, the new argument is that Messalianism wasn't a real unified movement. Instead, it was a polemical label. And by polemical, I mean it was designed to start a fight. It was basically a weaponized term used by powerful bishops to control independent monks who didn't quite fit into their neat church structure. Honestly, the best way to think about it is like a modern political attack word. You know how it works. The goal isn't to be accurate. It's to paint your opponent as extreme, as dangerous, as someone outside the mainstream. And it really seems like that's exactly how the label Messalian was being used. And the evidence for this is pretty strong. For one thing, the label was almost always slapped on monks who were operating outside of a bishop's direct control. Plus, there's really very little proof that they were ever one single group. And maybe most importantly, when you actually read the texts they supposedly wrote, you don't find some unique heresy. You just find a lot of stuff about intense devotion, themes that were actually super common in a lot of ascetic traditions at the time. So, if Messalianism was more of a political smear than a real thing, how do we make sense of that Ethiopian connection? Well, for that, we have to go right back to where we started, the words themselves. The linguistic trail is just undeniable. The Ge'ez language, the sacred language of the Ethiopian church, is absolutely filled with borrowed words from Syriac and Aramaic. They're like these little linguistic fossils, preserving this incredible moment of cultural exchange. Take a core idea like faith. The Ge'ez word, haymanut, comes directly from the Aramaic word hymenuta. Now, that's not just some casual borrowing. That's adopting the very vocabulary of belief. Or how about the word for priest, kasis? That comes straight from the Syriac word kashishi, which means elder. So the very structure of the Ethiopian church was being described using Syriac words. I mean, the pattern is just undeniable. Words for prayer, faith, priest, even for Christ, Masih from the Syriac Mashiach, they all point to this profound Syriac influence. And there it is, right at the bottom, our original word, Masalam, one who prays. It's not an outlier, it's just one part of a huge cultural conversation. And this right here is the absolute key to the whole story. A deep cultural and linguistic influence is not the same thing as adopting a heresy. So the crucial point is this. Finding the word Masalam in Ethiopia doesn't prove that some dangerous sect took root there. What it really proves is that Ethiopians were part of a much bigger conversation happening across cultures, a conversation about what it meant to be truly devoted to God, a culture that valued intense prayer, just like their friends over in Syria. So what does this all mean? It means that historical labels, especially labels like heresy, are almost never just simple descriptions. They're often tools, sometimes even weapons, used in power struggles. The story of Messalianism is a perfect example. It probably tells us way more about the anxieties of the bishops throwing the name around than it does about the people they were accusing. And that kind of leaves us with one last thought. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other parts of history are just hiding out there in plain sight, waiting for us to look a little closer and start questioning the label?